you generate as much paperwork as that.
Yeah, well,
Are you competing?
I don't know about that. Well, let's open with prayer. Father, we thank you for this time together. We thank you that last week we got to see your church come into being and the Spirit move and make it into a body of Christ. Help us this week as we look at the Middle Ages, a more complex time, and see your hand in that too. In Jesus' name, amen.
Can I get paper copies?
Uh-huh. We're going to start with the video looking at how we looked at last week. And Kyle should bring that up.
Fred, do you want me to close these doors?
Sure, that's fine. Here's all of them.
And which video did you want?
I think we should take a look at why the Romans persecuted Christians. I went through that last week, but nice thing to review and see.
Hey guys.
Hey guys. Hey.
So in this episode, we're going to get a bird's eye view of some early Christian history. We're going to cover some key events between the end-ish of the New Testament up to about 300 AD. Let's dive right in. So, previously in Christianity, Christ atoned for our sins. He organized his church. He died and was resurrected. Christ's apostles preached the gospel, and even as they were dying off, the Christian message continued to spread throughout the Roman Empire. Now, the ancient Romans were pagans, meaning they worshipped many gods, and in Roman government there really was no separation between church and state like there is now. In fact, the Pontifex Maximus was a government position, often the emperor himself, which was responsible for regulating religion in the empire, like a secretary of religion. Paganism was sponsored by the government, and Rome accepted gods from all over the empire into their pantheon of options.
There's just so many options.
That one's good. Looks like a medieval warrior.
But interestingly, none of those pagan gods offered salvation in the afterlife.
You're a fraud. Is there anything you can do?
Pagan gods were very concerned with the here and now. If you worshipped them and offered sacrifices, they'd bless you with rain or military success, etc. If you didn't, there'd be a famine or a natural disaster or other bad stuff. In fact, if the Romans lost a battle, sometimes they'd send investigators to that area to figure out which gods they weren't worshipping, and then they'd add them to the pantheon.
That's called stealing, you know.
The problem with the Christian God, however, was multifaceted. First of all, Christians believed that salvation came via their God alone, and all others were false gods.
You're not a god? You lied to me?
They refused to offer sacrifices to pagan gods and refused to offer sacrifices to the Roman emperor, who was considered quasi-divine. So not only were they seen as unloyal to the empire, but also the fact that they weren't worshiping Roman gods was construed as dangerous, because it might call down the wrath of those gods.
Brother, it is time for the mortals to pay.
So anytime something bad happened, this new religious cult was an easy target.
There you go again. Blaming everything else but yourself.
Early persecution consisted mainly of mob violence or persecution at the local government level.
Come and see the violence inherent in the system! Help! Help! I'm being repressed!
Christians had to worship in secret while people publicly villainized them and spread rumors about their beliefs. The sacrament was portrayed as cannibalism. Since they met in secret and greeted one another with a holy kiss, they were portrayed as a scandalous sex cult, things like that. Most scholars believe official government-sanctioned persecution began under the rule of Emperor Nero. So, in about 64 AD, most of Rome was destroyed by a devastating fire. According to the Roman historian Tacitus, rumors were circulating that Nero himself had orchestrated the fire, so he, in turn, blamed the Christians and ordered that they be rounded up and killed. Men in beasts' skins were torn to death by dogs or attached to crosses or, at nightfall, lit as living torches. It's believed that both Peter and Paul were killed in the purge. It was not a good time to be a Christian, nor was it a good time to be a Jew. In 70 AD, under Emperor Vespasian, Rome put down a rebellion in Jerusalem, destroying the temple and much of the city. But even though Christianity's central hub in Jerusalem had been destroyed and the apostles were being picked off, the Christian religious zeal and promise of salvation kept the faith moving forward, and they continued to gain followers into the 2nd century. Persecution continued in varying degrees throughout this century under various emperors, but this century is also noteworthy for the amount of new post-apostolic Christian literature that comes forth. Stuff from Ignatius, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Clement of Alexandria, and others. And remember that Christianity was by far the minority religion at this time. As converts came into Christianity, of course they brought with them baggage from their previous faiths. And after the era of the traveling apostles came to an end, leadership of the church fell to local bishops. Bishops in more metropolitan areas or in churches established by apostles generally had the most influence. For example, the Bishop of Rome sometimes acted as a mediator when disagreements arose between other bishops. But the absolute authority of the Bishop of Rome, later known as the Pope, was a concept that would continue to develop over many years. Maintaining a unified set of beliefs across Christendom was a tough deal. There was internal debate about beliefs, and quasi-Christian splinter groups had started to develop and would continue to appear into the 3rd century. In 260 AD, Emperor Gallienus issued a welcome edict allowing Christians to basically worship freely, and they enjoyed relative peace for more than 40 years. That ended in 303 AD when Emperor Diocletian issued multiple edicts commanding that Christian churches be destroyed, land seized, and books burned. He wanted Christians to revert back to traditional Roman paganism, and things got bloody. This is where we're going to end this episode, but as we'll see in the next episode, despite external persecution and internal division, Christianity, in one form or another, was here to stay. There's obviously a lot we didn't cover. Feel free to fill in some of the blanks in the comments section, or check out the links in the description for more info on this subject, and have a great day.
Okay, let's stop. There's some questions about that particular video. More of a review of last week with a few little things thrown in besides.
It's good. It's happy.
It is. It moves quickly. We didn't talk much about Diocletian, but Diocletian in some ways should remind you of some of the places in the world today where Christian churches are being destroyed, people are being persecuted, and books burned. That brings us to the rise of the Catholic Church one. Let's see that one next, and that gives us a good intro into the Middle Ages.
The rise of the Catholic Church. After the collapse of the Roman Empire, the bishops of Rome, called popes, struggled to survive the recurring invasions. In the 6th century, they established a mutually beneficial alliance with the Frankish Empire. In return for the spiritual support of the Church, popes received a province around Rome, called the Papal States, and Frankish rulers supported the spread of Christianity in Europe. The establishment of the Roman Catholic religion throughout Western Europe led to an elaborate hierarchy, or system, in which people were organized into different levels of importance. The Pope is the head, who governs the Church in the name of God. He is thought to be infallible and to hold the keys to the kingdom of heaven, thus providing him immense power over believers. In each country, there are large church districts called primacies, which are governed by archbishops. Each primacy consists of several bishoprics, run by bishops. Bishops supervise local priests, who are responsible for their parishes. The church officials make up the clergy, whilst the believers are called the laity. In the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church was granted vast lands and large incomes by kings and landlords. These made the Church extremely wealthy, so that popes and bishops could afford not only a lavish lifestyle, but mercenaries as well. This resulted in growing papal influence over European societies. By the 11th century, even kings were challenged by popes with a formidable spiritual weapon called excommunication. This placed a mighty ruler outside the law and meant that his knights were banned from obeying him. Papal power reached its peak in the 13th century when popes appointed emperors and had hundreds of thousands of heretics slaughtered for beliefs that were against the principles of the Catholic religion.
So we're going to look at the one that's titled 1100s to 1400s, Middle Ages. Some people call it the Dark Ages. It is not the Dark Ages. There's a lot of important things that happened during the Middle Ages. That's a moniker that was hung on that by the Enlightenment era. And they're looking back with fondness. The Greeks, the Romans, how wonderful they were. Forgetting, once again, like I pointed out last week, every empire has this dark side, and they had real dark sides to them. Not just abandoning babies, not just ignoring the poor and letting widows and other people who are disabled be completely on their own to go off and die, but the Romans considered entertainment to be murdering people in the Colosseum and other places. So it was a mixed bag, just like most empires. So looking at this, we have the Crusades as a starter. The Crusades, when they were talking about mercenaries, this is the Crusade, are mercenaries hired to go and liberate the Holy Land, Jerusalem and the area around it. Why? Well, they wanted to get free of Turkish Muslim control. And they want to ensure safe passage of Christians on pilgrimages to Jerusalem. It's not a modern thing. It's not a travelogue thing for the 20th century to go to Jerusalem. It's something that's gone on for over almost 1,000 years for Christians. They also used the carrot of you get special blessings from the church and you get special forgiveness of sins. And that's what indulgences and all this other stuff comes into play. And then they got to build more big churches. The major church in Vatican City was built with that kind of money, and so were a lot of the others. The Crusades had those objectives, but none of those were really achieved. Jerusalem was freed for a period of time, not very long, and then retaken by the Turks. Safe passage still depended on who you knew to get to Jerusalem, not a nice, clean way or clean path to get there for everybody. And of course, I doubt if God gave special blessings to them for starting all these wars. You're welcome to disagree with that. But we know for outcomes that these first four things are true. Before the Crusades, food in Europe was bland. How bland? They had one spice, salt. Think about it. That makes it really rather boring. Well, they discovered all these spices from Asia and from Africa, because Jerusalem area is sort of a meeting place of lots of areas to trade. And so they ended up with lots of different new spices. We got the destruction of the Eastern Empire. Why did we have a destruction of the Eastern Empire? We don't know for sure who came up with the idea on one of the Crusades, but they raided Constantinople, present day Istanbul, destroyed it, and stole all kinds of things. Somebody in the group decided that it was a cool way to make a bunch of money to help finance a trip or also to get rich along the way. And so our brothers and sisters from the Eastern Orthodox Church paid the price. Not a warm and fuzzy moment in Christian history at all. The decreased influence of the Catholic Church in the Middle East, because when they saw the Catholic Church was financing the destruction of the Turks, who actually the Eastern Orthodox Church had sort of a relationship with, that they got by for periods of time, depending on who was ruling, wasn't trying to conquer them more. And also the destruction of Constantinople and all, of course, really sent the signal of, we don't trust those people of Western Europe. And it fueled a very long-term hatred between Christianity and Islam. Islam looks at that and sees that piece and the chasing out of all the Muslims from Spain as being terrible times in their history, in which they paid a huge price for being Muslim. Questions about Crusades?
What year was the Vatican actually established?
The Vatican?
Yeah.
Vatican City itself? I don't know exactly when it was separated from Rome. Someone could look that up on a minute to see when it was separated. Originally, it was all together. But as the Roman Empire split up and the Papal States started to split up, it eventually split because there were multiple little Papal States in the food of present-day Italy. Lots of different ones that were not all under the same governance at sometimes, and sometimes were, but most of the time not.
I think around 300 or thereabouts was when the Nicaea convention was held. There was a lot going on in the Middle East and all over the place, but pretty much centrally located in the area of Rome. And I think they were trying to consolidate their power and control the church and the population.
There were lots of tiny city-state things in Europe. Yeah. Basically up until the late 1800s, when Germany consolidated more and some others consolidated more. And then most of them disappeared. There's four left actually. Andorra, which is in the mountains in between Spain and France. Liechtenstein, which is over on the border of Germany. Vatican City, which is right next to Rome. And then in the middle of what is present-day Italy, on a mountain, the longest existing independent country in the world since 700 AD, San Marino. Oh, I forgot Monaco. Monaco too.
And there's also
On the
little
coast of-
duchies, like the Duchy of Luxembourg and, do you say Liechtenstein already?
Yeah, Liechtenstein. Luxembourg's a little bit bigger though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This says, I may tell you that Vatican City was established in its current form as a sovereign nation with the signing of the Lateran Pacts of 1929. So not that long ago.
Yeah,
The area west of the bank of the Tiber River that comprises the Vatican was once a marshy region. But that is.
I can tell you who that pact is with, Benito Mussolini. They made a deal with Benito. I thought they predated that, and that was just a fine tuning of it, but 1929 it is.
That's for Vatican City being
For Vatican City
independent,
being
yeah.
totally independent.
totally sovereign.
Yeah, I got the impression from the video though that it was, as they started to split up, the kings versus the popes and stuff like that, that there was just an area that was established in Italy and was the main center point of that. I was assuming that was the Vatican.
It was a good piece of Rome too, for many, many years. Yeah. There were early attempts to reform or purify the church. And the reason there needed to be purification goes to these sheets that we had before with these quotes. We're going to take a look at Mark 6, 6 through 13 on that front sheet. Mark 7, I mean, verses 6 through 13. This is Jesus in his day taking aim at the Pharisees, who had perverted the Jewish religion and made it a bunch of unfathomable rules that no one could keep all of them, and no one could even remember all of them. But this can also be said about the church in the Middle Ages, where it became a set of rules and traditions that were so burdensome that the church had become not a place that people could go to for salvation, but a place of condemnation where you just never were going to win or never be able to be right in the eyes of God. Forgiveness was out there somewhere, but you weren't going, it wasn't attainable. Someone like to read the Mark 7, 6 to 13 piece?
Starting at 6.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. He replied, Isaiah was right when he fossilized, you hypocrites, as it is written, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules. You have to let go of the commands of God and holding on to human traditions. And he continued, you have a fine way of setting aside commands of God in order to observe your own traditions. Moses said, honor your father and mother, and anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death. But you say that if anyone declares that you might have been used to help their father or mother is korban, that is devoted to God, then you are no longer let them do anything for their father or mother. Thus you nullify the word of God by your traditions that you have handed down, and you do many things like that.
This also applies to the church in the Middle Ages. There were all kinds of traditions that came about. Indulgences just being one of them, where you could pay a whole bunch of money and you'd have your sins forgiven. And then all the money went to building more churches. There were a lot of other things. There were penance things that you had to do. It was many, many burdens that were given. The early attempts were started by Peter Waldo of France, and he became known, and his group became known as the Waldenians. From 1100s to 1200s, they were basically trying to get back into the Bible. This is an era in which people did not have Bibles. There was no printing press. Printing press did not come about until the late 1400s in Europe. because of lack of communication in the world, people still think that Gutenberg invented the printing press. Actually, it was invented by the Chinese back in the 1200s. But communication being such as it was, Gutenberg becomes an important person in Europe because Europe hadn't gotten any of those things from China. There hadn't been any trade going back and forth. So if you wanted a Bible, you had to write it from scratch, from someone else's. And that's what nuns and monks were doing in these monasteries. People like to paint them as doing nothing. No, they were doing lots of copying of books. Was one of the things that was taking place. And that was terribly important because if you had only one copy of a book and no one was copying it, if something happened to that, it's gone completely. So the whole idea of copying ancient writings, books of the Bible, things like that, became a duty of their devotion to God. In many ways, the church is more alive in the Middle Ages in the monasteries and convents than it is in the churches and cathedrals. Then we have Robert Grosseteste, the Bishop of Lincoln, England, was a very German name. And he's from the 1200s, and he was preaching about church and wealth and how the church was obtaining it in all the wrong ways, by laying lots of guilt trips and lots of burdens on people, pay this or else. And that poverty is a correct way of living. And the priests and all the other religious leaders need to be spiritual and not political. And not being self-serving bureaucrats. You can imagine that Robert Grosseteste and Peter Waldo were not welcomed by the Catholic Church at the time period. They were persecuted royally. Then we get Dominic Guzman, who's Spanish, and he forms the Dominicans to reform the church. And then he dies. And Pope Innocent IV, who was the fourth, but there's nothing innocent about him, and made this order to the keepers of the Inquisition that all the accused had no rights. The Inquisition conducted secret trials and torture to get confessions of guilt, and they were subject to no law, only to the Pope. So he turns the Dominicans of that time period into sort of Nazis of the era, yeah. Killing all kinds of people for dubious reasons. You could not win once you were accused. If you were accused, you were dead. You could confess, and then they say your soul would be going to God, but you'd still be killed. The Inquisition's big aims from the popes was to destroy all dissent within the Catholic Church. It was aimed at anyone and any group that disagreed with small or all Catholic Church teachings, and that the Pope was over all the teachings and over all the viewpoints and over all everything else outside of that was heretical. This is a time period where you have some popes that aren't even Christians. They're just self-serving, greedy bureaucrats. Sadly, unbelievers who are also all heretics. That takes all Muslims, all Jews. You don't have atheists in this time period. People would think in the Middle Ages, if you're an atheist or some kind of nut case, frankly. That was just not even thought of. Everybody believes something, even if it was nominal. And so the Jews and the Muslims are also persecuted besides the Christian dissenters.
Fred?
Yeah.
Most of the higher ups in the church, like the bishops and all, they weren't even priests. They were just members of the aristocracy who needed a job, basically.
Yeah.
And found it as a good way to enrich their family and themselves. They were not even religious.
When we had a rise of nobles, you wanted to have sons, and you wanted them to have one of three jobs. You wanted, if you had three sons, you wanted one of them to be a priest and rise in the hierarchy. You wanted one to be a lawyer to save your businesses and your business interests. You wanted one to be a ruling noble to take your place eventually. And the women were all often nunneries or marriages of convenience to join rich families, that kind of thing. So yeah, it was not about devotion. It was about power, and it was about influence.
Right. You were talking about the fact that people were in the monasteries and stuff like that, transcribing these different books and things like that. These particular books, are they the Bible?
Some are Bibles.
Okay. Who maintained the original copy of these, and how are they distributed and who collected and things like that to put back together to form the Bible as we know it?
Well, the Bible was formed as we know it way back in the 300s. Okay, and then it was copied from there, different people. These monasteries and convents had lots of connections back and around and back and forth. You may have an order of monks in what is present-day Germany, and you may have ones in Netherlands. You may have another one in France, and they're in communication with each other, besides copying and all. So if France doesn't have a copy of the Bible, complete Bible, the French monastery, one of the other ones might be copying it for them from their copy. And the same with other books.
There are very few complete Bibles. There may be the Gospels.
Right.
Or there may be the letters. But the whole complete Bible almost didn't exist. One of the big hang-ups is we didn't have paper in Europe. China invented paper, and then they made it a secret how they did it. And they wouldn't let that out of China. So we're busy writing on animal skins.
Right.
You know, with
So you have to go through the whole tanning process, each page for the animal skin to be able to write on it.
They used animal skins versus papyrus?
Papyrus comes from Egypt. It's a plant that grows along the Nile.
And it's the only place it grows.
Right, that's the only
And
place
that's
it
the
grows.
problem. So you have such a limited supply, it'd be cost prohibitive. Whereas you could find animals around your area, kill them and skin them, yes?
If they were following the Bible's teachings, how could they justify killing when it says, the Bible says you shall not kill? And you shall love your neighbors as yourself. How could they justify it?
They weren't trying to they were justifying it from the standpoint of they were protecting the integrity of the church of God, is what they said.
So the ends justifies the means.
Yeah, it basically was protecting their own power.
Exactly. And it wasn't so much doctrinal as it was power. Yet they were under one head.
They saw that this could be power, so that's where they went.
Hey, you know, it was no different in Judea during the time of Christ and before Christ, where they had the Pharisees and the scribes and all those babalus, and they were doing their little thing, and they all had their own little pocket of power, just like walking into the temple. They had to pay to get in there to pray, and it was the Jews, the high priests, and the other hierarchy within that said, bring me your dove, bring me this, and of course course, they made money off of that and went into the temple treasury. It hasn't changed. It happens today.
And that's why I had to read that Mark piece, because it fits perfectly with its era too.
Yes.
And yes, there are churches today that do that too. Some of the mega churches where their so-called pastor says that he needs money for a new jet. That was one that was last year. Needed money for a new jet. He couldn't just ride in regular airplanes, everybody else pre-COVID. He needed his own private jet. Because God had told him that he should have that. Yeah, right. So, outcomes. You got a fear of the church in Europe. Political and religious enemies are killed. And yet you couldn't desert the church because the church was everything. Because so much of Europe was not governed except by the church of the area. And what was the biggest building in the city? The cathedral or the bishop's church. So that was the only place you could really hold meetings for civic affairs, to decide on things or to talk over things. All these kinds of things centered around that power. They were the only people who married people. There was no civil marriages. They were the only people who could grant baptism to people. They were the only people who could register the births of your children. They were the people who did that, the church, because there wasn't a city government per se. So you couldn't desert the church even though the church was oppressive. You were stuck with it in a lot of ways because it did things that you needed to have done.
You couldn't be buried.
You couldn't be buried, yep. They owned all the churchyards for burial.
Well, church and state was one.
Yeah, church and state was one.
Political state and the religious state.
One of the things I thought was one of the best quotes of the year about the era was the last bullet there. The church could amputate, but it could not heal. That's what the church in the Middle Ages was like. Now, this is not dark ages overall. People look at it and say, well, there weren't advances in technology. Yes, there were. Bunches of them in technology and engineering. The problem was it was all aimed at warfare. If you go to a museum sometime, take a look carefully at the armor. It's a wonder of engineering. They had this part of the hands, and these things were so that you could grip weapons. But this was all metal. It was all intricate. You could bend your whole hand. You could open it all up. It was all layered. The body armor was in 3 pieces so that you could bend. You could do lots of different things. It was crowned in the middle here so that if a lance hits you, it goes off, not into you as easily. There's lots of technology, but it's all aimed at warfare. They have the same thing for footwear as they did for hands to try and protect the top of your foot. Also, a lot of technology went into how can we break down giant walls of castles and forts. It was all about catapults. Eventually, toward the end of the Middle Ages, it was starting to look at cannon. How can we penetrate this? And so once you get to about the 1700s, nobody's building castles or forts. There's how thick can we make it anymore because it doesn't do any good because there's technology blowing apart. So sadly, much of the engineering and technology thing went all to warfare for the time period and not toward a lot of improvement in people's lives. It wasn't as buried as we get today. If you look at the next page, you'll see that we had a thing going on in which there's a whole bunch of popes at the same time. 3. We have 3 popes at the same time. Now, if you want to have a prescription for total destruction of authority of the pope, this is a perfect one. Had 3 different popes, one in France, one in Italy, and then another one, and they're all claiming to be this supreme authority, and all having backing, because by the time this happened, nobles and others are starting to gain some of the civil power, and they're backing different people. And so for a period of time, there were 3 different popes, and they were at war with each other. And yeah, one of them even declared a crusade against one of the popes and sold indulgences to finance a crusade against one of the other popes. This is the perfect storm for seeing the power of the church start to diminish and the secular power start to rise. Because they're the people with the guns and things backing one or the other, and the people and everyone's starting to see that maybe there isn't a one authority on earth, human being that's directed from God. Maybe there's something else. And then the call for going back to the Bible starts to become stronger. Because that's where they'll find that something else. Eventually, there's a holy, in 1414, there's a Holy Roman Emperor forms a Council of Constance. And they depose all 3 popes, and they elect Pope Martin V, which really sets the tone for the Reformation coming up, because at that time, people are starting to look and say, okay, you can dispose of popes like trash, and nobles can do that, dukes and kings can do those kinds of things. Where is their authority? What kind of authority do they have? Where does it really come from? And they start asking hard questions, setting the stage for the Reformation. And this, of course, raised that new problem. Who's the ultimate authority then? The general councils that meet? Or the Pope? And then the pieces here of the stage set for the Reformation is that you have stronger temporal power, you have kings, you have dukes, you have other nobles who are filling that gap of power. And the church becomes weaker, church corruption is being exposed, and there's new leaders, spiritual and temporal, all waiting for opportunity to force changes on the church. And the Catholic Church does change. We'll see that next week. The Jesuits come in and change a lot of things about the Catholic Church, but it's way too late. It's a proverbial closing the barn door after all the animals left.
There's a lot of politics within their ranks as well.
Right.
Tremendous.
And they did some not good things along the way. Let's look at the Middle Ages one, and so we can get another look at the Middle Ages instead of just hearing about it.
This one or this one?
That one's good. Let's start with that one.
Yeah, I remember someone telling me once that the Bible in the Middle Ages was chained up in libraries, and that it was unloved and unwanted. And at the time, I didn't say it to my friend, but it didn't make any sense. Why would you chain up something you don't want? Usually you chain up the things that are very valuable that you're worried about they're being stolen. I lock my car because I want to have my car tomorrow, that kind of a thing. What I found out in the research, though, is that the problem with the medieval Bible was not a series of wolves in sheep's clothing stealing the Bible and locking them up. Rather, it was as the church moves into northern Europe, into more humid climates, more at least wet, damp climates, the materials changed. You go from things like papyrus and parchment and other types of things to vellum and other types of materials that are made from animal skins. And if you think about it, there are a lot of pages in a Bible, and there's not that much skin on a sheep, no matter how much you take off of it. At the end of the day, you're going to have a lot of animals and a lot of processing of the skin itself to be able to make the sheets for the Bibles. Then you're going to have someone make the ink, make the quills, know how to write well, and be able to copy the Bible word for word. It is an enormously slow process, and the materials are quite high in value. And what I always say is the reason why no one had the Bible is because each Bible cost the size of a medium to a large size house, at least in terms of the relative value of it. Also, even if you couldn't make Bibles for everybody, the literacy rates were so low that handing them a Bible wouldn't help them. So what you needed were good Bibles that would be read in churches and more of the auditory listening of the Bible, which was very common in the Middle Ages. You heard the Bible all the time. You and I think of private reading as the only way to read the Bible, but in fact, public reading of these big, large Bibles was the way the Middle Ages made the Bible accessible to folks. Now, of course, the big problem was it was in Latin, and sometimes it was not read very faithfully. So there are challenges, yes. But no one took the Bible from the laity. Rather, the cost was prohibitive. You couldn't have a Bible. And it was only when Gutenberg came along and he dropped the price because he made it so cheap and easy to reproduce that it really changed.
Question
There
about
was
that?
also language issues. The Bible was Hebrew, and Greek. Now in Rome, that area was, in Europe, I should say, it was Latin. And so, yeah.
Yeah, St. Jerome took the Hebrew and Greek, translated it into Latin, and that was basically what they had after that, unless you're a scholar.
And it's called the Vulgate.
Right.
It's, and that was for many, many hundreds of years, the only Bible they worked from. And so when they were copying Bible passages and copying Bible books, they were copying it from the Vulgate usually, Latin to Latin. Because Latin was the language of scholars. In fact, that's true all the way almost to the 1700s. Almost everything John Calvin wrote originally was in Latin, not French, even though he's French. Because that was the language of scholars. So you have to kind of really think, looking way back, and think like it is now today, yet for biologists. Biologists communicate about any creature because there's a Latin name for all of them.
The whole science was in Latin, and if you look at copies of like Newton's writings, everything is in Latin, because that's what you expected other scientists or scholars.
It became the dominant language and the recognized language worldwide. The known world.
Right. And then we have an overview of the Middle Ages.
Hey guys.
Hey.
So in the last episode we talked about papal supremacy, anti-paganism in the Christian Roman Empire, and the fall of the Western Empire. At breakneck speed, this episode is going to cover a 1,000-year period known as the Middle Ages, or medieval times. Generally, this is the time period between the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 and the fall of the Eastern Empire, also known as the Byzantine Empire, in 1453. Let's do it.
Let's do this thing!
In the last episode, we talked briefly about Christianity in the 5th and 6th centuries, but in the 6th and 7th centuries, something important happens. The vast majority of Western Europe falls under the rule of a Germanic people called the Franks, who formed the Merovingian dynasty, which later turned into the Carolingian dynasty under the rule of King Pippin the Short.
Don't you dare use that name as a slur.
While Pippin is settling into his new dynasty, the Lombards are harassing Italy. Now, Pope Stephen hasn't been able to count on the Byzantine emperor in the east for help, so he goes to the Franks in the west, who by this time have converted to Christianity. King Pippin comes in, beats back the Lombards, and gives the Pope power to rule over chunks of the Italian peninsula, territories that would come to be known as the Papal States. I should also mention that meanwhile in the Byzantine Empire they held a couple more ecumenical councils, the Third Council of Constantinople and the Second Council of Nicaea, which you can read more about in the description.
Here, educate yourself.
After King Pippin dies, his son Charlemagne takes charge, and at the beginning of the 9th century the Pope dubs him the Holy Roman Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. Dang it, the Holy Roman Empire. The Pope dubs him the Holy Roman Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, even though he's ruling from Aachen, a city now in Germany, and Rome is left to the Pope as the capital of his papal states. But the relationship between emperors and popes was
weird,
because theoretically the emperor would be crowned by the Pope, but the Pope had to be approved by the emperor. So each sometimes saw the other as subordinate, and that made things awkward for the next several centuries. So we've got the Holy Roman Empire in the West, where the Pope is head honcho in religious matters and many civil matters, but we've also still got the Church in the surviving Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire. Over the centuries, a rift forms between the two regions. The Pope in the West is claiming authority over the Church in the East, and the Patriarch of Constantinople is like, no. Theological differences also form, and in 1054, the Pope and the Patriarch of Constantinople excommunicate each other. The Christian Church subsequently breaks in two.
Let's split up. Do we have to?
This is known as the Great Schism. The Roman Catholic Church in the West and the Eastern Orthodox Church in
In case you didn't miss that quick list they had, one thing we didn't talk about last time is they argued about celibacy.
in the East. The rift continues today. Roman Catholicism is still popular in Western Europe, and Eastern Orthodoxy dominates Eastern Europe and Russia. But despite the schism, the East and West teamed up to fight against a movement that had been gaining territory and influence in the Middle East for centuries, known as Islam. Pope Urban II called for the First Crusade in 1095, promising forgiveness of sin in exchange for military service. In 1097, Crusaders and their Byzantine allies conquered Nicaea. In 1098, they took back Antioch, and in 1099, they took their main objective, Jerusalem. In 1147, the Second Crusade to take Edessa was a major fail. Muslim forces retook Jerusalem in 1187, so the Third Crusade's aim was to take it back, which didn't happen, even with the aid of the English King Richard the Lionheart, the guy from all the Robin Hood movies. The fourth and final major crusade was also meant to retake Jerusalem, but due to an odd and unfortunate series of events and circumstances, the army attacked and looted Constantinople, which definitely crushed any chances of East and West Christians getting back together again. But in addition to fighting against Islam, Crusaders were also sent to stamp out Christian splinter groups deemed heretical. The story of a group called the Cathars after the sack of Béziers is particularly horrifying. One source recorded that when the Pope's representative was asked how to differentiate between faithful Catholics and heretics in the city, he responded, "Kill them all and let God sort them out." But the Middle Ages come to an end with the siege of Constantinople by the Ottoman Turks in 1453. Constantinople's walls proved no match for the advanced Turkish artillery. The city fell to the Islamic army, and the Turks hold it to this day. This event sparked the beginning of an economic depression for Europe because Constantinople was the economic throat of the region. That whole Silk Road trade route into India and Asia, you can kiss that goodbye. Europe was desperate to reestablish a trade route, but going all the way around Africa was just not the most practical.
That's we're running the Reformation here. Question about those.
What caused, going back before this period here, I sort of really together or people were together and stuff like that. What caused the split between Christianity and Islam?
That was because Muhammad came up and said he had a new prophecy from God. And the church said prophecy from God that results in books that becomes part of the Holy Scripture are done. They made that decision back in the 300s that had been completed. And then so much of what he was saying was contradictory to, and a lot of it was also of the Quran pieces copied from the Jewish Bible. There's lots of different things in it that weren't original to him, but he claimed were original. He got that from Allah.
We know what area of Muhammad was actually from? Either country?
He was from present-day Saudi Arabia area, which is why you end up with Medina and Mecca as holy cities.
What was his date? Was it 900? 600?
600.
600.
600. The other big holy city besides Medina and Mecca is Jerusalem, which makes huge conflict with Jewish religion people and Christians.
Well, didn't they want to build their praying house, Temple of the Dome, in Jerusalem on the Mount of Olives? I mean, not Mount of Olives, whatever the whole mountain is.
Temple Mount.
Yeah,
Temple Mount, which is where it is.
Thank you, Lois. Yeah. Keep me straight during Revelation. Anyhow, but yeah, there was a battle for that piece of real estate. Yeah, it was a definite one. Many of them. And the Muslims still have it today.
There's a lot of friction. The only places where it was not friction was parts of Spain where Jews, Christians, and Muslims all lived peacefully under Moorish rule. That was a good example. Turkish rule ran hot and cold. Christians and Jews lived okay sometimes under it and sometimes not. Same was true in North Africa under Muslim rule. Sometimes it was okay and sometimes it was not okay at all. At the very beginnings it wasn't okay at all, and that was when Muhammad with his army was conquering and it was become Muslim or die. But as years went by, it became less that way at times and more that way at other times, depending on who was in charge. We had our time period of that too in West Charlotte. That's how Charlotte made Christianized. Was much of Western Europe. Stop being a pagan, be a Christian, or die. Not necessarily a way of getting people who are going to be very devoted, but the way of getting people in.
Same way with Constantine. Same thing.
And so we look here at the quotes page again, and I think it's important to remember again from that quote from Michel Van Loon, why the church history matters. Church history has helped me discern truth, better understand my identity in Jesus, and strengthen what I believe. Church history is my family's story, and if you're a follower of Jesus, it's your story too. Those who came before me were a product of their time and place, their stories, their flaws, failures, courage, and faithfulness put flesh on the bones of history for me. We're going to find things that are not pleasant. We're going to find things that we agree with. But it's all part of the history of people trying to put together a church to serve God, or sometimes trying to put together a church that serves themselves. You can have both, and that's where the conflict comes. Is the church being made to serve themselves, or is the church being made to serve others and God? And when that conflict hits hard, the church splinters and has all kinds of problems. The other closing remarks from people? Would someone like to close in prayer? Thank you.
Abba Father, we thank you, Lord, for giving us this wonderful opportunity to join and learn about our church and its origin and throughout historical times. Father, there is so much to this that it would take us years just to understand the intricacies and the power-hungry men and women that lived on this earth and still live on this earth. But don't necessarily pursue your will, but their own will. Father, we thank you for, again, this opportunity. May you bless Fred and everybody here, and as we leave this place, keep us safe. Bring us back next week. This we pray in your son's name. Amen.
So besides the beautiful buildings from the Middle Ages, the other thing that they gave us that we still have today, stained glass windows. And that was because of low literacy. Very low literacy, so if you were a priest and you were going to teach people about the Bible, you used the windows of the church. And the windows had the stories from the scripture. Thank you for your participation and for being here.
Thank you, Fred.